So hello and welcome to the BDO and Queensland Government Department of Agriculture and Fisheries webinar on assisting agribusiness with recovery planning. Today's webinar is the fifth in a series developed to support the food and agribusiness sector during COVID. Today's webinar will undertake a deeper dive into strategic planning methods that you can use in considering your business recovery planning in the future. Firstly of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Mark Cushing. I'm a partner in advisory at BDO in Brisbane. I'm primarily responsible for strategy and transformation, which looks at strategic planning, optimising you and transforming your services. But more relevant to COVID, I think, is the ability to undertake with our clients business continuity and disaster recovery and crisis planning. I also have with me today our food and agribusiness SME, Sean, and I'll get him to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sean McKinnon, and I'm a partner in the advisory team, in particular in the food and agribusiness team here at BDO. Most of my work is in the corporate finance and restructuring advice and transactional space. I also hold a Masters of Agribusiness from Marcus Oldham College and come from a line of family interests in horse and cattle properties.
Thanks for that, Sean. Look, today's webinar will focus on a couple of things that you can see from the agenda today. We'll take you through, as we have in other series, a current state of coronavirus. Sean will spend a bit of time providing you a bit of an update on some of the challenges and things that we're seeing in the market in relation to the agribusiness sector. We'll also have a quick recap on the previous webinars. And today's focus is really about how can we give you some practical advice on recovering and doing some strategic planning out of COVID and during COVID. We'll also be taking questions from the audience and answering these at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to submit any questions as we progress through the webinar. And the next slide, I'll give you a bit of insights into how you can do that if you don't know how to do it. You also want to note that when you leave today's webinar, you'll be presented with a survey to gather your feedback on today's webinar. So can you please complete that form and also indicate future webinar topics that you would like to see covered in relation to any sort of business continuity or strategic planning. So as I just said, in relation to the webinar questions, you can submit these as shown on the screen. There's a little question mark icon there. If you click that and type in your questions, we'll be able to receive them through the webinar and try to answer them best we can at the end of the webinar. But if there's anything that we don't get to, obviously we'll get them redirected to the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries and get them to assist. So in relation to the current state of coronavirus, Australia's had success in flattening out the curve. We've seen several streaks of consecutive days with no new cases in Queensland. In fact, this morning, the Queensland Premier announced that we've gone a whole week with no new cases, which is fantastic news. COVID testing continues, and since our last webinar, we've seen continuing ease of restrictions. The Queensland borders, however, as you know, still remain closed, and recently we've seen an increase in the numbers in Victoria. Let's take a quick look at the COVID cases around the globe in a little bit more detail. And unfortunately, the cases internationally have continued to grow, but we also note that limited testing is also occurring in these countries. And this is leading to a potential understatement of those current numbers globally. At our last webinar, I think it was done in the end of April, we had just reached 3 million confirmed cases across the globe. And as you can see from that number, in only 2 months later, we're now at 9.1 million cases and 473 deaths, unfortunately, across the globe. In Australia, 7,555 cases were sort of have been recorded as of 7 o'clock this morning on the 25th of June, with 67 confirmed in the past 48 hours. And we've had, unfortunately, 104 deaths here in Australia. Today's webinar, in collaboration with the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, is intended to provide you with a practical way to undertake a strategic planning exercise to help better position you and your business for recovery success. Post this session, we'll send out a copy of this webinar and recordings to all participants. As usual, we'll start with an update on the challenges and solutions from a government and industry perspective, and I'll hand these over to Sean to take us through them.
Thanks, Mark. So look, reflecting in terms of challenges and solutions, there is a shift in relation to both government and industry focus from removing blockages in relation to COVID-19 to now exploring the opportunities. Significant uncertainties remain for agriculture as for much of the sectors of the economy. As restrictions ease, Queensland's agribusiness will continue to be focused on recovery, and the trends, behaviours and preferences of consumers under the new normal are relevant. And there's a few emerging themes that I'll just touch on briefly now. First of all, economic uncertainties. There's a general nervousness with agricultural businesses due to the unpredictability of the extent and pace of economic recovery at home and overseas. And the withdrawal of government support measures and the timing of economic recovery domestically and internationally is also a contributing factor to some of this anxiety. When we talk about withdrawal of support measures, we're talking about things like JobKeeper, for example, that are proposed to end in September at this stage. There's also changes to food preferences, buying patterns, income and behaviour, and these aren't yet clearly articulated as to how they'll impact agribusiness going forward. But there's also been increased cooperation. We've seen closer cooperation between government and agriculture businesses, between agricultural businesses themselves, all as a result of COVID-19. Now, DAF and other Queensland government agencies, they've retained the Agriculture Coordination Group and other consultative mechanisms with rural industry groups that they've established for the COVID-19 response phase. Their focus is on now the recovery and strengthening and growing of the agricultural sector. Agribusiness has also had more interaction rather than a competitive response. They've shared health plans, market intelligence and challenges. Common issues are being raised and there's a commitment to work across boundaries to look for solutions, which has been really positive. Let's touch on labour and workforce requirements for a second. So meeting workforce needs while interstate and national border restrictions remain in place is a primary concern for many and continues to be so. Horticulture, wool, red meat, fish and grains are all focused on their labour needs for the next 12 months, particularly with respect to seasonal workers. The horticulture agribusinesses in particular are focused on their summer pick coming up and looking at getting seasonal workers for that and for the next 12 months. As workers look to return home and restrictions around movement continue and remain to be unclear as to how long they'll last. From a reliability and food safety perspective, on a positive note, overseas countries who depend on imports to meet their requirements have become far more focused on sourcing their needs from trusted and reliable sources. So this is an opportunity in Australia with our clean, green and ethically sourced produce. The degree to which such sentiments persist and the implications for Australian exporters are yet to still be played out though as we move forward. From an ag tech and virtual services perspective, online purchasing and auctions such as livestock or trade shows, remote auditing, e-certifications are all examples of changes in business practices accelerated by COVID-19. Benefits have been realised by agribusiness and regulators and are likely to be established in new business models going forward, all around the issue of ag tech. And finally, from an international trade perspective, it's worth touching on the fact that Australia's relationship with China is becoming more volatile. Most recently, barley and beef producers have been impacted. Now, this has the potential to become a major issue for Australia, given 25% of Australia's agricultural exports currently go to China. However, on a more positive note, emerging free trade agreements coming online with Indonesia shortly and currently being negotiated with the UK are positives. Producers in numerous sectors are proceeding with caution though, as we try to understand whether or not there will be further fallout from China or COVID generally with respect to how the economies around the world have been impacted.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sean. That's great. Look, please make sure that you subscribe to the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries weekly email updates in relation to COVID-19. And you can do this by subscribing to their agriculture news, and it's an email newsletter. It's an important resource which is set out weekly and highlights to you any developments you should be aware of in the industry moving forward. You can also scan that QR barcode on the screen. You can do that with your iPhone apparently, or you can use a dedicated QR reader app to access the DAF website and subscribe to the newsletter. We'll also have the URL on the screen during our question and answer session later in the webinar. And you should also be continuing to monitor that Queensland Government website that's been created for the COVID-19 response. A lot of industry assistance packages and other announcements across government are all centralised in that location. So I'll now quickly recap on our previous webinars for any new attendees on today's webinar. So BDO and the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries have conducted 4 webinar series to date. These previous webinars cover areas you need to consider and seriously think about, and which was helping you manage and navigate your business through a pandemic like that we've experienced with COVID-19. And these previous webinars are still available in full from the BDO website, and they're on the page and on the screen. So that's that www.bdo.com.au-webinar series URL. So our first webinar back in March covered 5 key areas of consideration in managing COVID-19. And these areas covered things like maintaining the sustainability of your business. We took you through a process to understand your critical people and how to get the best out of your resources during the pandemic. We looked at health and safety elements to ensure you have a safe working environment, not only for your staff, but for your customers. We looked at the use of technology to support you through that pandemic period to ensure that communication and collaboration was enabled, but also being mindful that, you know, some information security and other potential risks were at play. And finally, navigating the complexities, and we spent a little bit of effort on the supply chain, and we looked at areas of vulnerability and risk to your business so that you could address those moving forward. In the second webinar at the beginning of April, we covered the practical approaches you can adopt to your business continuity strategy. It primarily covered a business process-led approach and how to document your continuity plans for each critical business process. And we had a real emphasis on the business criticality during the pandemic. We also introduced you to undertake event logs to make sure that you were capturing any relevant actions or decisions you made through that period. And this evidence is important to support you with any other government support packages that you applied for or that you received. In webinar 3, we conducted this in about mid-April, and we discussed the process of evaluating, refining your business continuity plans, because there was a lot of changing developments and response that's been introduced to, I guess, get the economy going, but, you know, support particular industries. And so refining your continuity plans quite regularly was really important at that stage. We also highlighted the Queensland Government's health plan and the Safe Food Queensland's checklist to ensure that your business complied with the government directions. And then finally, in the 4th webinar series, which was conducted in the end of April, we provided you with some real-life examples and resources that the agriculture industry were taking across their workforce and looking at the health and safety elements and their supply chain that hopefully that you could learn from and pick up and adopt in your own businesses moving forward. So now turning to the content for today's webinar. In past webinars, as discussed, we've covered business continuity planning, which has hopefully provided you with a deeper visibility into your business and protected your critical functions as you dealt with COVID-19. We now want to position you to take advantage or take that knowledge and consider your business in its operations into the future and commence developing a strategy for its continued operations and recovery. Today's webinar will provide a framework for you to do that. Now, Sean, can you please take us through a bit of a summary of where you've seen and where you think we're heading?
Sure. So let's reflect on 2020 for a moment and try and summarise what we've experienced so far. We start at the beginning of the year and look at January and February. It's fair to say that everyone was doing business largely as usual. With respect to COVID-19, we were aware that it was happening overseas, but there was no focus on it locally, apart from some sporadic feedback at that time of supply chain disruptions in some industry participants, mainly with regard to getting produce stuck on docks in China as they were in lockdown. But as we move forward to March, what we saw then was a reaction to COVID locally. We saw community anxiety as restrictions were put in place with panic buying of necessities, and we also saw our borders closed to international visitors, and many businesses and individuals started working hard to preserve capital, which slowed down some economic activity. Social distancing became prominent. There was a request to flatten the curve from the government, and we responded. These factors combined saw overall reduction in economic activity nationally, notwithstanding that many parts of agriculture remain largely unaffected. Now, across April and May, we've seen a bit of an information overload, really. The response and the restriction announcements from all levels of government have made us appreciate the situation we were in as we saw continued expanded restrictions. However, by the end of May, we started to see these restrictions easing, and we started to see a really positive economic response on the back of the positive medical response that we'd had. June, however, saw some concern when in Bundaberg, a Victorian fruit picker travelled there and was later diagnosed with COVID-19, which highlighted for us the ongoing risks despite Queensland's impressive COVID response today. And since then, a hotspot in Victoria has started to emerge, and restrictions there are now going back to restriction levels that had previously been removed, demonstrating again the risk of a second wave if we don't adequately plan and continue to monitor for COVID risks. And on the back of what's happened over the last couple of months, we're now entering into what will be the first recession that Australia has seen in 29 years, as the full impact of COVID-19 manifests itself in this quarter of economic activity. So if I look forward, ahead of us is obviously unknown and there's a bit of uncertainty. With public and private relief measures scheduled to begin to end from July and more likely up to September, there's a growing concern that without a plan, we could face a potential debt cliff of sorts. This is when we'll see JobKeeper come off and ATO repayments will be needed to be made, and banks will stop providing potentially at least assistance around some of their loan expiries and deferrals. We'll also see around that time the landlord and tenant code of conduct expire too. So at the same time as this government support and JobKeeper rolls off, we're going to have to be understanding the fact that if we're not prepared, that there could be some major impacts on your business. Now, if we look at the impact across industries within agribusiness, and we look at it from an agribusiness focus, you can see from this slide that there's been positive impacts felt around food and essentials, especially grocery stores and the emergence of the home chef phenomenon. But to counter this, there's also significant impact on the other side with the complete shutdown of hospitality and the food services sector, which has reduced demand for specific products produced by agriculture. So now, if we look at it from the Queensland Government response to COVID, they've done it through three main pillars. The first of which is building vital infrastructure. The second is strengthening Queensland's industries. And the third is enabling future growth. Now, you're able to obtain more detail on each of these strategies from the Queensland Government's COVID-19 website. Now, across those pillars, there's a continued response strategy being developed to provide support to the diversified components of Queensland's economy. The Queensland Government recognises the importance of the agricultural sector to the economy's recovery and is clearly focused on strengthening the ag sector and also positioning it to take advantage of opportunities that may arise as we exit COVID and start to see increased economic activity. Now, DAF as a department is also providing input into other recovery streams that overlap with the agriculture and food industry recovery, such as manufacturing, innovation, and transport streams. And in terms of initiatives that are targeting the agricultural sector specifically, the government has just announced a $12.5 million funding package in the last week, which is set across three programs aimed at securing jobs to sustain and support Queensland's economic recovery. Now, the funding package is designed to support digital transformation in the agribusiness and food industry. It's designed to reinvigorate trade relationships and also encourage diversification in a post-COVID-19 environment. Now, more specifically, if I go through each of those, there is $5.5 million that's been allocated to digital transformation in agribusiness. That's to develop integrated supply chains that improve traceability, biosecurity, and food safety. There's another $5 million that's been allocated to reinvigorate agricultural trade relationships. It anticipates doing this by supporting e-commerce and virtual trade facilitation in key markets, and it also looks to assist coordination of the demand for additional regular air freight services, which has obviously been pretty topical as air travel subsided significantly. Finally, there's another $2 million of that package designed to go to agribusiness diversification assistance. This is intended to build capability and explore potential diversification opportunities in ag businesses. And it also includes tourism-related ag businesses. Now, also, not part of this package, but announced yesterday, the Premier has announced there will be a further $5 million in grants for cluster fencing in Western Australia. Now, DAF will release more information in relation to these and other initiatives via the agricultural news and government websites as they become available. And I would also recommend that you continue to collaborate with DAF Share your ideas with them, provide them with feedback and ideas, as this will help them to continue to inform their future initiatives for the industry's recovery.
Thanks, Sean. That's fantastic. And I guess that's part of the reason why we've got this webinar today on strategic planning. There's a whole range of opportunities coming out of government. There's a whole range of uncertainty heading for the sector as far as the coming months around July to September. And so that's why strategic planning is really important. So now we'll look at some practical ways you can start thinking about undertaking a strategic planning exercise. And there are 3 important reasons why you would do a strategic planning exercise. Firstly, it sets the direction you want the business to head in. Too many businesses do this in an ad hoc way. It allows you to set goals you want the business to achieve, but it also provides direction on how you will achieve those goals over time. If this is done well, you will establish achievable milestones to make sure that your plan is progressing and is staying on track to achieve the desired objective. Secondly, it allows you to prioritize initiatives and maintain focus on those specific activities across the business that are important. There are many activities you could do, but in response to taking advantage of the opportunities presented by COVID, it's more important that you have a dedicated focus on these activities, giving you the greatest business benefits moving forward. And finally, by having a documented strategic plan, it allows you to achieve organisational alignment across your business. If your staff don't know what direction the business is heading in post-COVID or during COVID, or what activities to focus on, they will not be actively supporting or delivering you with the desired strategic outcomes that you want to achieve. So today we're going to take you through 2 approaches that you could use to help you with undertaking a strategic planning exercise. We'll start with a more simple approach around a SWOT analysis, and then we'll move on to something a little more detailed called a business model canvas. A SWOT analysis is a planning technique to help you consider your business from a number of perspectives. The firstly one is around your strengths. So these are the characteristics of your current business that give you an advantage over others. These are the things that you're doing really well or that you're famous for. And these are the things that you want to keep doing and improve on moving forward if possible. Then you want to take a really good look at your weaknesses in your business. And these are the characteristics that give you a disadvantage relative to others. And these are the things you know you don't do well and potentially are areas for improvement across the business. And you should take a bit of an internal and external lens when you look at your weaknesses. And then there's a number of opportunities. We've talked about them. There's a number of grants and other things that are occurring. So when you look at your operating environment, how can you exploit or take advantage of these opportunities? Could they potentially enable you to create new service lines or look at the way you do your business a little bit differently post-COVID, for instance? You may think about things like your workforce. A number of organisations we're working with are challenging themselves around, do they need the same floor space or office space to manage people within their businesses, given that a high percentage of people can do their roles from home now. And then another element is threats. So what are the elements in your environment that could cause you trouble for your business? And obviously COVID's a big threat, but there are others. And these are the things that could impact your bottom line or lose your customers, causing your business viability to be threatened in the future. Knowing these threats and putting actions to avoid these are key planning activities to address. By documenting these across your current business operation, it helps you identify any future strategic initiatives or that direction your business needs to go in the future. For example, if you're in a situation of tight cash flow, your business will not be in the current position to heavily invest in new products or methods without the support of some of those grants that Sean has taken us through previously. And similarly, if you see that your product is capable of being frozen, for instance, you might be able to diversify your product mix during this period and look at moving into a frozen food market to extend the distribution of your product, but also provide consumers with a quality product with a longer shelf life. Other opportunities might be that you can bypass wholesalers and increase margins by selling to consumers directly. So a SWOT analysis is a really simple method of looking at your organisation at a high level and then planning out those initiatives you want to exploit around your strengths, take advantage of the opportunities that are being presented, minimise any risks associated with your weaknesses across the business, and also start to plan and mitigate for those future threats around your business viability moving forward. As I said previously, another method for analysing your business for the purposes of undertaking a strategic planning exercise is the mapping of a business model canvas. The business model canvas breaks your entire business up into key elements to help you look across the business of your across the entire operations of your business, and it allows you to have a greater detailed look at that and be a little bit more targeted and specific around the parts of your business that you want to focus on. So a canvas comprises of 9 building blocks, and these are sort of documented on the screen, as you can see, and they help facilitate a discussion around your business and where opportunities exist for improvement. Typically, a larger organisation will capture their current operating model at this level of detail, and then identify a bit of a target or future state to transition to over time horizons. These strategic plans become the method to achieve those desired future outcomes that you're looking for. So I'll go into these little sort of 9 elements in a little bit more detail. The first thing to look at is your value proposition. And this is the statement around your organisation or the promise of a value that your business or products or services give to its customers. So for example, if we look at Uber's value proposition in the market, they pitch that they are the smartest way to get around. And I guess, with COVID, you've got now an opportunity to look at that value proposition. It may stay the same or it may slightly shift, and think about the value that you're providing your customers in a different way. If we then look at the customer segmentations over to the right there, these are all the people or the organisations that your business tries to serve. So in here, you would outline the various customer segments that you currently deal with. So for example, you might be a producer that only provides product in a certain geographical location in Queensland. You may be an organisation that's just focused on the youth or the elderly, like from an age demographic perspective. Or you may actually, looking at a customer segmentation around the psychology of people who prefer to have organic food over other types of foods. And then if we look to the channels, these are the ways in which you deliver your product or service to the market and your customers. These things are things like wholesalers or how you actually get your product out there. You may be considering things like online channels for people to make orders online and those sorts of things. The other element of the canvas is to look at your customer relationships, and these outline the relationships that you have established with your customers and understanding those. Are the customers with you because they're loyal to your product? Are the customers with you because they're really satisfied with your product? Are your customers giving you ideas on where you can improve and what things you can focus on to not only retain your customers but bring in new ones? Another element of the canvas is your revenue streams, and this is where you look at your pricing mechanisms that you generate revenue from your customers. For example, the product sales, you might have some sponsorships through your revenue. You might actually hold regional events that people come along to, and that might be another way in which you generate revenue. But having a look at all those things that brings revenue into the business. Then you would look at things like your key resources, looking at your infrastructure that you need to create and deliver and capture that value that we spoke about. And these are the sort of key assets that are critical to your business operations. For example, you might be your factories, your buildings, your properties, machinery, your vehicle fleets, your key people that you have in your business, or you might have some grants that you've taken advantage of as a resource to help with your business. Another element is the key activities. So this is where you capture those key activities in your business that you perform well. So when we think about SWOT analysis and alike, and so looking at those critical processes in your planning. So for example, key activities could be for sales or product development, marketing, packaging, distribution methods, and those sorts of alike. And another element that's really important is to look at your key partnerships. So who are those key people or partners, that you assist to help leverage the value of your business model? Basically, typically you won't conduct all these activities by yourself. So you might use a partnership model to help you with the distribution of product or the transportation of produce, or you might have partnerships with suppliers or industry associations, and understanding those and whether or not in the future you need new partners or different partners moving forward. And when you take all that into consideration, you're looking then at your cost structure. So, what are all the things that are, you're spending to run your business? You've got labor costs, you've got taxes, you've got costs associated with maintaining building and infrastructure. You've got energy related costs. You might have a high software or technology burden. You might be spending a fair bit of money on advertising, etc. So understanding all those costs across your business and where there might be opportunities to run a little bit more efficiently. So if we take a look now at a really high level example of a cucumber farmer, for instance. So this particular cucumber farmer might provide a snack-sized cucumber to the market. So one of the things that they might look at in a sort of strategic planning exercise is they look at their customer channels, and they may not currently provide an online portal or some sort of e-commerce. And you know, when we heard before from Sean around grants coming out of government to move into e-commerce and those things, here's an opportunity to sort of look at your business model and maybe look at how you can develop up an e-commerce opportunity out of the business model canvas. You also may want to think about the segments. You know, this particular example, the cucumber farmers looked at families with children and supermarkets, etc., as their segmentation for their customers, but they may want to think about, well, you know, is there a need for some restaurants and chefs? Do they like baby cucumbers or snack-sized cucumbers on their menu? So looking at your segmentation and seeing if you can add to that. And you also may want to think about, you know, partnerships. So for instance, this particular snack-sized cucumber may want to have a partnership with a company that pickles cucumbers, for instance, and is there an opportunity to sort of grow revenue or build out an opportunity for more sales to get their pickles with their cucumbers to a pickler, for instance. You also may want to look at reducing costs. So they might have a high burden cost around advertising and thinking about, well, do they need to spend as much money on advertising to reduce some of the back office costs? As I said before, they might have an opportunity here if they've got office work to not have office spaces if some people can perform these duties from home, etc. So all of these are sort of, not just as a high level example, existing and new elements that you can think across your business model canvas. And then these would form a bit of a strategic planning activity to focus the business for the next few years in relation to any potential growth aspirations, or maybe even just having business sustainability over the next 3 years. It's important to use all available data in your strategic planning processes, and this provides you an opportunity to make evidence-based decisions moving forward and to use data to monitor your daily operational performances in your businesses. We also want to highlight that the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries have released a market trends, or are releasing a market trends bulletin, which provides you with data-driven industry insights on a regular basis. And this is really about informing the market specifically around supply and demand, and some pricing insights to help you, get a gauge on what others are doing. In addition to the Safe Food Queensland are developing a data-driven approach to collecting information in the production and processing chain that's capturing real-time information that you can analyse your business against industry benchmarks and help identify business efficiencies. So for example, there's been a real focus on reduced wastage that you may also want to consider adopting or in your business moving forward. So finally, I just wanted to provide you with some more practical content in relation to how you can start capturing a sort of, an action plan out of some strategic planning exercises. And there are some simple key points to consider. Firstly, we'd be recommending that your planning needs to be fit for purpose. So if you're a small strawberry farm or a large meat works, how you do your strategic planning exercise needs to be appropriate to the size and scale of your operations. For example, if you're a large organisation, you may want to consider taking an off-site planning day with your executive team and have a dedicated focus for that day to look at a business model canvas, for example, and then unpack all the opportunities where you might want to take the business moving forward over the next few years. But if you're a smaller organisation, you may not have the luxury of doing that, and you might want to have a bit more of a low-key way to think about maybe even doing a SWOT analysis with a couple of key people and identifying some future opportunities to start actioning and start tracking. So we do appreciate that one size does not fit all, which is the same advice we've been giving you through the whole webinar series, even for your business continuity planning. But our tip here on this one is to spend time documenting in a plan of action and start to track those strategies that you've been thinking of and that you want to achieve. Take your planned items and try to break them down into some smaller, actionable components. Assign timeframes, responsibilities, define what you're trying to get the outcome for, and these tips will help the strategy come to life and become an actionable and less complex to achieve. It is important that you remain agile in your business planning, and we would recommend that you do a bit of a do, measure, then review and adjust if needed methodology to help you get visibility of results and for you to quickly determine if the specific plan that you've put in place is still on track. An example of documenting a specific strategic initiative is shown on the screen, and it's only at a high level only and a practical example only. So as you can see from the example that we've put on the screen, the example for this is about expanding sales channels into online sales by 2020. And as you can see, we've tried to break down that high level objective into some key actionable steps with expected timeframes being determined, looking at a measure of when things are going to happen, who's responsible, and for this strategic initiative to be completed. And that's a way that you can actually track and hold people to account in your business to help drive your strategy and your strategic outcomes. So look, thank you. That sort of brings us to the end of our webinar. And we've got some Q&As in a minute, so don't go hitting the end button just quite yet. But before we move to the questions, Sean and I want to recognise the results from the sector over the past couple of months. And speaking personally as a consumer, I think that the industry has responded extremely well and continue to supply great quality produce to consumers. I certainly can't recall any sustained shortages of supply of produce in my local supermarkets. We appreciate it's been a tough year or so far, and we acknowledge that life's changed pretty quickly in a short period of time. But as an industry, you've showed remarkable resilience and collaboration to maintain operations, and I think Sean touched on a fair bit of that collaboration earlier. There's a significant level of collaboration ongoing as well, not only with your competitors, but across government. We're seeing a lot of government agencies at federal, state and local playing nice together, which is great. And it's important, I guess, that we continue to do this, at least continue to sort of plan and recover and support each other as we move forward. Reverting back to our silos and the way that we used to do things in the past is only going to not support our agribusiness moving forward. Your agility needs to continue in order to be able to respond. And as Sean talked about, the real risks are there of COVID second wave, and Victoria's sensing that and feeling that right now. So please maintain that vigilance. Don't be complacent in relation to COVID and all the measures that you've adopted. Continue, I guess, to look at those risks in this community and those hotspots for transmission, and please all remain safe. Thank you. So now we'll open up to any questions that we've received during the webinar, and I'll just have a look to see what's come through. We have got questions. One's come through, and it's for you, Sean. This question is from Edwina in Queensland, and she's asking, when can we cease taking temperature off of staff every day? We are currently harvesting and packaging avocados.
Thanks for the question, Edwina. So our advice would be to continue with the risk controls you have implemented to reduce the risk of COVID-19 cases, and that includes obviously taking temperatures at this point. It's important that this activity would continue because if you can see from recent examples in Bundaberg and Victoria, the importance of controls continues to be critical. Any business with seasonal workforce also needs to have completed and submitted a health plan, which no doubt you probably already have, and you should be guided by that as well.
Thanks for that, Sean. You've got another question here. This one's from Anthony, who's in Cairns, and Anthony's asking how to apply for the diversification component of the Queensland Government's Unite and Recover package.
Hi, Anthony. Look, we understand that the logistics of those funding packages announced by the government for agriculture are still in progress. Further details of those will be released by DAF's agribusiness newsletter, is my understanding. So I'd encourage you to visit the website on screen and subscribe. Also, keep monitoring the Queensland Government COVID website for other announcements as they come to light. And Mark, we've got one here for you this time from Laura in Sydney, who has asked, what would help a business change their product offering if they have evidence that it's good to do so?
Thanks, Laura. Look, I would suggest that if you have confirmed the viability of changing your product offering, that you make sure that there's a clear plan, as we've just sort of talked about today's webinar, on how you're going to make those changes. The other point I would raise is make sure that you're being agile and incremental in your approach, and make sure that each step of that change that you're looking to achieve is being measured and continually confirming that the change is heading in the right direction that you want. So look, I think that's all the questions that we have for today, and I want to thank everybody for your attendance. Please contact Sean or myself if we can assist you or your organisation in relation to your continuity response or any strategic planning needs that you need as you move through recovery. As you leave today's webinar, you'll be presented with a survey to gather your feedback on today's webinar. So please fill in that survey. Agriculture and Fisheries and BDO, we do review and act upon feedback that we get. BDO will also be providing a copy of this webinar shortly. We'll add it to the BDO webpage in the coming days. But on behalf of the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries and BDO, we thank you for your time and attendance today's webinar, and we wish you all the best.